savages did to the Bibas children and the fact that they sent back a body that wasn't the mother's body, claiming that it was, are acts of savagery that certainly viewers of this channel were not surprised by. This is Hamas. This is Palestinianism. This is what they do. But in international reaction, if you can call it that, if you look at world media, at some statements by politicians, even the UN, there have been condemnations of Hamas in the context of what they did. Also, in yesterday's part of the deal where Hamas released 6 living hostages, they brought 2 hostages who were not a part of the deal to watch the other hostages being released and put that video online as well. Also, something that some in the West are upset about and some in the West are silent about because this is the side that they fully support. My issue is not with the those who fully support the savages. I have an issue with them, but in this context, this is not my issue. My issue is with the people who are condemning this, but in the same way that they condemned October 7th, and then at any attempt of Israel to fight against this, to prevent this from happening in the future, we hear condemnations as well. The Pierce Morgan style, Hamas is bad, but also, and these are not the words he uses, but also any action taken to prevent Hamas from being Hamas are also bad. That is worthless. That is you are supporting Hamas if you do that. You are supporting the Palestinians. You're supporting Palestinianism. I think every episode probably we should remind people that most people who took part in the atrocities of October 7th were not Hamas, were not part of the planning. They just heard that, including the people who kidnapped the Bibas family, they just heard that the fence had been brought down in several places, that they can flood, as they called it, flood Israel, kill people, kidnap people, and they did. Others celebrated in the streets. What we don't have from anybody within Gaza or within Palestinian society, if you want to call it that, in the West Bank, is condemnation of that. Nobody condemned it. Nobody. And this is Palestinianism. And if you think there is any scenario in which you would support them having some sort of political autonomy, you are supporting this happening again, even if you pretend to be upset now. Welcome to the Daily Objective. I'm Razi Ginzberg. I'm joined by James Valliant. James, your thoughts on reaction around the world to the last few days?
It's very interesting to watch how people respond to deadly extortion, because that's what we're talking about here, extortion based on a threat of death, and trotting out the people who are still hostages to witness this. And there's two sets of eyes that are there, that they're really augmenting the torture of. The people who are the loved ones of the two who have not yet been released, and of course the 2 men themselves who've not yet been released. And it turns up the dial on the emotional torture, and it focuses in on that emotional torture. They know how much we in the West value individual lives, and they're going to use that every degree, every little step of the degree of extortion. But this is just much, I put a gun to someone's head and say, or else. Now, this is a much more sophisticated way of putting that gun, making you see that the gun is there, making everyone else see that the gun is there. Yes, we will kill them if you don't comply with releasing, hundreds more Palestinian terrorists and criminals. We will release them if we don't get, a state of our own. We won't release them. See, this is a form of extortion, and how people react to extortion is very interesting. The correct moral response is to destroy those engaged in the extortion. You up the ante on them. You hurt them for doing the extortion at all. But that is twisted morally around, saying, oh, no, now you're the killers. No, no, no. The ones who took the hostages are the killers. Whatever. If they kill them now, killed them a month ago, killed them back in November of 2023 is when the Bibas family were killed. Okay? And whether they killed them then or they kill them now in response to anything Israel might do, it's still their fault. You don't blame the victim. And that's the exact point. Some people react to extortion by blaming the victim for their reaction. You didn't pay the blackmail. You didn't do it appropriately. You allowed them to be killed or further tortured. But this is the further torturing of the victims in this case. And it is particularly perverse to blame the victims as they up the ante of their extortion. So as if they're upping the ante of the extortion makes it more Israel's fault. You see, that is the absolutely backwards way of looking at this. As they augment the extortion, that means we have to augment our punishment of the extorters. And it's not our fault what they do with hostages in their custody. No, in fact, what we have to do is think of the long term. They know how much we value individual lives. And if it was my loved one who was a hostage, as we've said many times, I would be screaming bloody murder. I would be saying, make the exception in my case. Of course, of course, of course. But when you're a government, you've got to think about the future. You can't reward hostage taking. You can't reward extortion with the price of human life. Because guess what? It's going to happen again and again and again. The long-term impact of complying with the extortion artist is to get more extortion, is to get more of the violence that they're threatening.
Yeah, and in terms of blaming the victim of extortion, in this case, this is something that is prevalent in Israeli society. You see people, Netanyahu was giving a speech. I didn't fully look into the story, but he was giving a speech, I believe today, and he was talking about the Bibas family, and people were shouting, "Why didn't you get them freed?" Remember, they were murdered within a month or so. They were murdered in November 2023. Now, people who watch this channel know I'm no supporter or defender of Netanyahu. I think it happened on his watch because of his policies. So he absolutely is to blame, but that is not where the blame goes. It's not, why didn't you immediately, essentially what that says is, why didn't you immediately respond to October 7th by asking the perpetrators of October 7th, what do you want? Let me give you whatever you want, and basically give you the victory. And that's a big part of what's scary here, is the fact that in Israeli society you hear that which is in effect pro-Palestinian propaganda, and there's no other way to say it. I know the people taking to the streets don't actually want Hamas to win, but what they are advocating for will lead to a Hamas win, and I really hope they understand that. A couple of other things. I just want to thank Bonnie for the super chat, and thank you, Apollo Zeus, as well, for the super chat. And I want to read this comment from a troll. Let's call him that. He says, I watch you even though I can't stand your propagandist perspective. Shaking my head. It's just so that I can watch the courts. I can show the courts who we are talking about. Keep up the bad work there, Ziontology. And that tells you, when I said, okay, there are people in the West who will condemn the murder of Jews and then condemn anything Jews do to defend themselves. There are those who don't pretend. There are those who want the world to be run by courts that basically say, killing Jews, great. Speaking out, this is what we do on this channel. We don't actually take the action that we advocate for Israel doing, because we don't have an army at ARCUK, but they want this to be something that in the courts we would be tried for saying, you know what, Britain was right in World War II to bomb the Germans to smithereens and defeat their culture. So remember, this is your enemy. Your enemy is within, first and foremost, because if we didn't have that enemy within, we would have no excuse to not win these wars.
People always say, we can't judge. It's funny, the enemies of Israel, October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. No, it did not. It happened after decades of appeasement. Israel and America have been appeasing these monstrous terrorists for decades, and October 7th is the causal upshot of that appeasement. And so they drop all that context as they say, do anything, pay any price to get these hostages back. Oh, okay. So you'll drop that context the next time it happens because you've now paid the extortionist his price, rewarded him, encouraged him, given him the new manpower, even as we release Palestinian monsters in exchange, given him the new manpower to actually do it after rewarding him for doing it. So in future, when it happens, oh, they'll say it can't be judged in a vacuum, but the part of the context they won't include, the vacuum that will continue to exist in their heads, is how their previous appeasement sort of teed this up and actually necessitated it, made it possible and brought it about, encouraged it, rewarded it, made it materially more possible, and then it happens again, and then that's what they get all vacuous about, is that very aspect of the context. It's not because Israel exists or that Israel's been fighting for its existence or that America supports Israel and that's what caused 9/11, say, because that's what we were told. No, just the reverse. It's our appeasement of them that keeps causing these terrorist incidents to happen again and again and again. And they keep trying to do it. And last week they tried to bomb buses and they would have killed lots and lots of people, but for some circumstantial good luck there. Because guess what? They don't get punished for the extortion until and unless the extortionists get punished. Until we say, no, we're not going to pay your extortion anymore, you will get more extortion. You will get more terrorism. This is what we're doing. And that you're absolutely right, people who say October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened in the context of decades of Israel and Israel's one friend in the world, America, appeasing terrorism. And that's what you get when you appease terrorists, when you pay the extortion. But no, they'll zero in, and they're the ones, you see, who create a vacuum of the context. They suck out all the relevant facts and then focus on the fact, well, you see, you're fighting terrorists. Just surrender and it wouldn't have happened. Well, of course, if Israel just surrendered, if Israel had never fought for its existence in the late 1960s or had sense, would this have happened? No, it wouldn't have. But how many Jews would have been killed in the meantime? How much more anti-Semitism would have? How much suffering of Jews around the world would that have necessitated? They drop all that context. So they've got it exactly up. I'll say it again and again. So long as it's the case, they've got it inside out, upside down, and backwards when it comes to even analyzing the context, the wider context in which this occurred. It's not the fact that Israel exists or Israel fights for its existence or America deserving terrorism because it supports Israel. No, that's getting it all upside down, folks. That's complying with the values, the terms of the extortion artist. And think of their mystical demands. These are people perfectly willing, like we said until we were discussing the Bibas family, these are people who kill babies with their bare hands. That's what you're paying the price of. More of that kind of atrocity.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexis, for the super chat. Alexis says there seems to be no limit in these people's depravity. Yeah, and I don't know if you're referring to Palestinians or if you're referring to their supporters in the West, but it applies in both cases.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff, for the super chat. Ideology says, this is Israel's real-life trolley problem. Considering strategy and morality for the common good, does the IDF go in now and be decisive, or just let this linger as Hamas regroups? Well, that's maybe the problem with the trolley problem as well as a kind of philosophical question. I mean, look, you can say that about October 7th itself. We keep hearing, and there was a whole Al Jazeera documentary saying, look, Israel had issued the Hannibal Directive. The Hannibal Directive is where if you have you know that hostages are taken, you know where they are, you can bomb them as well as their captors so that they won't be held in captivity. That is whether or not it happened, and I think it did happen to some extent, that is perfectly legitimate. Now, in Gaza, the problem was Gazans, and that problem still exists. And that problem is we don't know that, okay, we can do this deal now, and then we can restart the war and then prevent the next October 7th. Do you know that the next October 7th isn't taking place, in 15 minutes? Do you know that it's years away? Do you know what's going on in the West Bank where Israel isn't taking care of the situation? And we saw a couple of days ago buses exploding. Luckily, at the wrong time, therefore not killing hundreds of people as the otherwise would have. So no, I mean it's tragic that this happened, and that is why the war should be fought properly immediately and not wait and see the consequences. They did that with the Shalit deal. They released 1,000 terrorists, they released Sinwar, and they got October 7th in return. And
It is
that is
doing this that gave us October 7th. Provably, demonstrably, there's an easy set of facts to lay out. Sinwar was released in a corrupt deal, and what did we get? October 7th. That is exactly, I mean, nothing could be more clear in terms of the facts here. But let's imagine we're just talking about local criminals. We're not talking about some cause like the Palestinians claim they're fighting, a cause. Let's say there's hostage takers who've taken hostages during a bank robbery. The police have gotten there before the bank robbers could escape. So they're holding hostages, say the bank employees inside the bank. So it would be wrong for the police to make entry and try and stop the whole situation. And if some of those hostages get killed, now get this, either by the hostage taking bank robbers or by the police and friendly fire, it's still the hostage takers and bank robbers' fault. Legally speaking, it is all their fault. And if you say that we're unable to effect entry, the police couldn't get in there to capture the hostage, to end the hostage situation, then all you're doing is, why don't we just give them a first-class ticket on a plane and safe exit and let them keep the hostages as they go to the airport and make their safe escape? Everyone could see that that would be a corrupt policy. But that's exactly the policy that people, writ large in the situation of Hamas right now. That's the situation. They're saying that any cop who would go in to stop the bank robbers, capture the bank robbers, free what hostages we can, they're the evil ones. They're the ones killing the hostages. No, it was the bank robbers who took the hostages. Whoever dies, however they die, whether it's the hostage takers who kill them or the police in their attempt to capture and end the hostage situation, it is still the bank robbers who are to blame. And yet that same moral logic somehow does not apply to Hamas and the Palestinians. I do not understand why, because in an ordinary law enforcement situation, you wouldn't blame the police for, the SWAT team or the special tactics team who comes in to try and rescue the hostages and arrest the bank robbers. If some hostages get killed in the meantime, would you? That would be morally perverse. It would be all the more morally perverse because it's a wider cause, frankly. What you're doing is you're multiplying it by 1,000 when you say that logic applies here. No, ladies and gentlemen, any harm that comes to any of these hostages is the result of Hamas. I don't care if it was an IDF bombing or, as we found out with the Bibas family, it had nothing to do with that. They killed the babies with their bare hands. Because guess what? When you start paying the extortionist knows no bounds. You've actually liberated him, rewarded him, encouraged him, provided him material support. And that is exactly what all these deals with Hamas will do. It'll release more Palestinian terrorists. It'll give them the moral sanction. It'll set up the incentives for the reward of more such terrorist activity. No, we have to blame the criminals involved. In this case, we have to put all the blame squarely on Hamas. We can't look at extortion. And as we see the torture of these two guys, psychological torture, and their families, will we say that makes it all the more important that we pay the extortion? No, it makes it all the more important that we not pay the extortion and we make the extortionist suffer. That's the only way to look at this, morally speaking, through a correct moral lens. Otherwise, you're morally sanctioning the bank robbers and their hostage taking.
El Rito says in the chat, don't feed the idiot on chat. You can block if it gets too obnoxious. I absolutely encourage anybody who doesn't want to see that to block these trolls. We sometimes block them, but sometimes we let them go, in part because, this is one of the rare trolls who actually gave us a paragraph rather than a flag and a two-word slogan, and then went into kind of all caps and full-on anti-Semitism and actually basically expressing support for what was done to the Bibas family. So it's good to see who these people are, and they eventually show who they are, although I think he showed it with his first comment. Uh, I'm looking at some of the headlines, and you can see the difference between, semi-reasonable media outlets like The Spectator that has a title, Hamas's Final Torment of the Bibas Family, and The Guardian, which has a title, Middle East Crisis, Israel claims Hamas killed Bibas children with their bare hands. Um, yeah, that's pretty different, but it's also uh, Israel, if that is actually what Israel said, screwed up here. It's not Hamas. Again, we don't know that Hamas, we don't know who actually killed them, but we know who took them, and it was not Hamas. It was the Palestinian people, and because Israel keeps refusing to name the actual enemy, what what do you expect those in the rest of the world to do? I mean, that even just like the Palestinians see Israel's weakness and take advantage of it, so do the savages who support them. They do that maybe not by murdering, although Jews are being attacked in places all over the world, but they do that with their propaganda. You didn't hear as much of the anti-Israel. You heard a lot, but not as much when, for example, Israel started fighting in Lebanon and did things properly. You heard less because there was less to say because Israel was actually standing up for itself and doing what needed to be done. So Israel, your weakness is heard by your enemies, and they are taking advantage of it, and you will be paying for that mistake, and
Look,
as will we all.
look at the despicable nature of that headline. Israel claims. Why, God, I wish they would do that with Hamas claims. Hamas claims, and put it that way. Now, wait a minute here. Does it matter?
Wait, actually, let me read the next part of it under the headline. The subheadline was a statement from IDF spokesman contradicts Hamas claim the family was killed in an airstrike. So I'm sure Owen Jones would be upset that it wasn't first a Hamas statement and then maybe
Right,
maybe
right.
mention what Israel said.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, but wait a minute here. Hamas is, I know that Hamas, okay, let's try and in our minds distinguish between other groups and Hamas here. And let's say that it was just a bunch of Palestinians who went and took the Bibas family, as seems to be the evidence. And let's say it was, and I don't know for sure because I don't know the circumstances under which they were held, but let's say it was completely independent of Hamas leadership that the Bibas family got killed. It is still Hamas's responsibility. They created October 7th, the context, they took other hostages. Now consider all the facts that you're dropping there to absolve Hamas of guilt. Hamas is guilty for the Bibas family. Let me repeat that. Hamas is guilty for the death of the Bibas family, even if no one officially associated with Hamas had anything to do with their taking or killing. Full stop. You have to ignore all the rest of the context in order to say Hamas is not morally responsible. Well, look, it wasn't a Hamas group that took these people. It wasn't a Hamas group that killed those babies. Oh, no, 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 no. Hamas is 100% responsible for making it possible. They are responsible for it happening. They took other hostages. They killed people. They started the thing. And then you tell me that other Palestinians joined in and they took the Bibas family. Well, yeah, okay. That is, you're right. We have to name the enemy correctly. It's Palestinian culture. It's the willingness of Palestinians to do these things in the first place that Hamas is taking advantage of. But also, it was Hamas's activity on October 7th that these other Palestinians were taking advantage of. The enemy is Palestinian culture. Well, perhaps the worst enemy is our own moral confusion, our moral perversion when it comes to analyzing extortion, the extortion over human lives, over the lives of babies and mother. I mean, when you comply with that extortion, we are acting in the morally inverse, perverse way. We are the ones encouraging it. In effect, we too share some responsibility. Obviously, it's qualitatively different than the responsibility of the Palestinians. But our policymakers in the West, they are part of the causal, paying the extortion is part of the causal process by which we get more and more endless war, terrorist activity, and I promise you more October 7th, insofar as we pay the extortion.
Um, so yeah, first of all, yeah, I agree with you, and when I point out that Israel is missing the point when it keeps talking about Hamas, I'm not saying Hamas doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be destroyed, but that is insufficient. Destroying Hamas's military capabilities, and by the way, when Israel talks about its demands for stage two of this deal, it's that Hamas uh, disarms and that their leaders leave, which is astonishing to me. I mean, even when we talk about a peace plan where all the population of Gaza has to leave, I'm wondering, and I keep saying I think this might be too generous towards them, considering what that society is. But certainly the leaders do not get to live anywhere. So yeah, Hamas needs to be destroyed, but that would not be enough. And
No, the
I want to point
Palestinians
out,
need
yeah,
to suffer. The Palestinians need to suffer. All of Hamas, I mean, all of Hamas needs to be killed, wiped off this planet.
yeah.
Uh, but Palestinians need to suffer for their culture, for their values, for these attitudes that make it possible. Because how many times do we have to put up with it, that possibility being realized? How many rockets from Gaza does Israel have to put up with? How many more terrorist incidents from some other? Let's the bus again with like the buses last week. Do I know it was Hamas? No, I don't. It could be some other Palestinian group. That's why the entire Palestinian culture is our enemy. And how much of these threats, how many bombings, how many terrorist attacks will be enough before we say it's the Palestinians and their culture that have to suffer and suffer and suffer until they cry uncle, until we know that their crying of uncle is sincere. They have to convince us, not the other way about, my friends.
Um, Wonder Freeman says in the context of the Guardian headline, be glad that they are actually reporting the statements of both sides. Well, in the case of the Guardian, I'd expect it because they pretend to be a legitimate news source. Here's another headline from Middle East Eye from 2 days ago. The headline is Israel says it knew Biba's family was dead despite claiming they might be alive. Now, I would not attempt to reason with the people who write these headlines. But I would say to the audience, because clearly Middle East Eye, like almost every pro-Palestinian media outlet out there, thinks that their audience is stupid. So let me try to help explain it to you. Um, so if Israel has knowledge that that there's something that is the case, that a hostage is dead, but does not have a way to bring back the body, and does not have, it could be that you know for near certain, but you also know who you're dealing with. You're dealing with despicable people who not just murder, people who murder also are okay with lying. I know this is a shocking revelation, but yeah, and you don't want to have any sort of official confirmation until you are able to fully confirm it, and in some cases until you're able to bring back the body. So Middle East Eye they chose to highlight what is important to them and their audience, not the fact that the Palestinians murdered babies with their own hands. That's irrelevant. That's resistance, right? But what's relevant is Israel, the statements of Israel, and to what extent they fully are correct about what Hamas is doing.
God, you can say that 10 times over. Put it in italics, all bold, all caps, with an exclamation point 7 after it, because that's exactly it. I mean, we're supposed to believe them. We're supposed to believe them when they say that. I mean, how can you do that? And imagine the father of the Beavis children. I mean, what is in his mind? It's okay. Hamas says they're dead. At what point do I believe them? Oh, well, now we'll just expand that to Israel. At what point is Israel supposed to just take that as given? We don't. We don't believe anything that comes out of their lying, atrocity committing mouths. You don't. What kind of psychological, look at the psychological games they're playing on those two guys who they brought out to watch the release of the other hostages. These people are playing a psychological game with lies. And, it's like that old movie, The Exorcist, when the old exorcist tells the young priest, the demon will mix truth with a lie. just to get to you psychologically. That's exactly what we're talking about here. A demon and you can never tell what the mix of the truth and the lie is coming from the demon. You have to disregard his assertions altogether. Okay, if Hamas says they killed someone, you can say, well, they're probably correct. They killed that. But yeah, well, I'm not going to, guess what? I'm not going to base my actions on anything, on a reliance on anything these monsters may say or not say. They're playing games with our heads. They're playing games with the victims' heads. They're playing games with our heads by mixing lies with the truth, and they cannot be trusted as such. That is why you don't listen to the offers of the negotiation stances of the monsters who do this. You ignore the extortionist and you do what you can to end the extortion and kill the extortionists. And when it's a life and death situation, that's all you can do. Anything else is to reward the extortion.
Yeah. Somebody in the chat says, you are occupier and you have stoled a land. Zionist pee and poo pies show again. Well said. This is somebody with a
This is
with
the
a
eloquence
German.
and intelligence that we've come to expect.
Yeah, and this is somebody with a German name, so it's always nice to hear that some aspects of German culture, which for the most part were destroyed after they went full Palestinian, are still alive and well, and yeah, this is yeah, evil and stupid are not mutually exclusive, but wow.
Well, evil requires a degree of self-induced stupidity. Let me just put it that way. Evil is characterized by evasion and their selective and self-induced stupidity. So they go hand in hand in one sense.
Yeah, Carl says in the chat, if we had our current media around during World War II, Nazi Germany would still be around. Absolutely, and they would be the good guys, or at least the victims in this situation. And and the people they're bombing, the people who they're sending to concentration camps are somehow in the wrong, because what were they doing there? Was it their land in Germany anymore that it's their land in next
Oh
to
no,
Gaza?
the BBC would get a documentary from Hitler Youth, just to get the youth perspective on the suffering in Dresden after Britain and the United States bombed Dresden. And because after all, we need the Hitler Youth perspective, and so let them make a whole documentary and then broadcast it to the West. Hitler Youth perspective on the firebombing of Dresden by the Allies. That's the perversion we're talking about. That's how corrupt we've gotten here in the West. That's how pusillanimous, cowardly, but more than that, we fail even to identify the moral situation correctly. See, the better thing about it was that in World War II, we could identify the moral situation with clarity. We wouldn't have put up for 5 seconds with a documentary made by Hitler Youth on their youth's perspectives on the firebombing of Dresden. That's how perverse we've become.
On
And
a
that's
government channel, on a government
on a
channel.
government-sponsored channel. Right.
Well, like I say, it may be the last few days of civilization, but at least they give us material to do shows about. One such show coming up on Tuesday will be, by the way, the German guy in the chat, I'm sure voted today for a very reasonable party in the German elections. We may or may not cover that tomorrow, depending on um, the results, if they're interesting enough, and of course, what happens elsewhere, because bad stuff happens, and
Look
we
at the
we cover.
cloudiness of European politics, though. Look at the way it spreads, it oozes out without conceptual identification, too. It's sort of emotions on this side with this configuration, emotions on that side with this configuration. They don't think seriously about ideas, moral or political, frankly, because, of course, it's philosophical corruption. The answer, ladies and gentlemen, if you want a clear understanding, if you want to have some moral clarity on the situation, is philosophy. And let me suggest the philosophy, you could do no better than the philosophy that guides us here, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. Only philosophy can give you a clear insight and understanding as to how to deal with, especially when it comes to monstrous atrocities like Hamas commits on a routine basis, and the nature of that evil and how it has to be dealt with.
So on Tuesday, on this show, The Daily Objective, I will be interviewing Michael Kaufman, who is a regular panelist on the reality show. Uh, that title of that is I don't remember what the exact title is. Something like "Why I Will Not Hire Pro-Palestinian Protesters." Of course, he uh, runs a pharmaceutical company, and he is choosing carefully who he wants to hire. And we talked about doing this episode a while ago. Would have been a great fit after the during the campus intifada, but hey, these people are out protesting still, so it's still very much relevant.
It's
Um,
so funny because, you know, at one time in my country, and it shows the difference too, and the degrees of moral corruption. You know, if you didn't hire someone because they were a communist, you were some evil person discriminating against communists. No, private employers, and very different. Again, you see, we need moral principles here. So you got to tune in to see Dr. Kaufman and Razi. That's going to be a fascinating conversation. It is not persecution to not hire someone because they have odious ideas. No.
yeah. Thank you, Warren, for the super chat. Warren says, in the end, I don't believe Israel will survive the population war. Islam will do to them what it is doing elsewhere, outbreed, miscegenate. I don't know what that word is. Um,
Miscegenation, that's the mixture of races.
and ultimately reverse assimilate them. Yeah, I look, first of all, having more people hasn't worked for Israel's enemies so far. That's not how reality works. I mean, Islam, Islamic culture, by and large, to the extent that it survives and to the extent that people there live well, I don't know if we can say that. It's the stuff that we give them, basically. It's the stuff, the fact that we decide, we in the West decide to uh treat them as if they're trading partners and so on. And yeah, I think the West should recognize the problem, but the problem is certainly not it's not a racial thing. And you
No.
see this with the many people, the many ex-Muslims who are risking their lives. I mean, the only thing that uh, serious, consistent Muslims hate more than Jews is ex-Muslims. And yeah, you have a mind, you can use it. You can use it even if you were born in Gaza or Tehran or Afghanistan or wherever you are.
And this is the history of dictators. They depend upon the sanction of their victims. They depend upon trade with the West. They depend upon either trading with them or getting actual subs. You know, in the 20th century, were it not for American investment, Americans going out of their way to subsidize dictatorships, those dictatorships would never have got survived. They would never have had the material resources they needed. No, the story of dictatorship is how comparatively freer countries will sanction them, trade with them, actually subsidize them, as well as give them moral sanction. And that's what keeps dictatorship alive. That's what keeps an evil culture alive. And it has nothing to do with numbers either. I mean, look at history. This is Ayn Rand Center, UK. Great Britain is a very small country in comparison to the world. And yet, through the 19th century, it is the British Empire that dominated. Yes, because they had superior technology and a bigger economy, but also they had the moral backbone to civilize the world to the degree that they did. I'm not saying everything that the British Empire did was morally acceptable, but what I'm saying is their moral confidence combined with their technological and economic superiority made them the masters of the world, really, for a century. And it was when, not because the rest of the world caught up economically or technologically, it's when Britain lost its moral backbone and confidence that it pulled back and became what it is today. And then, of course, more recently, they have varied in their policies so that they are not as economically and militarily as dominant as they were in the 19th century. It's ideas, it's ideas, ladies and gentlemen, that shape the course of history. And that is a perspective uh, somewhat unique to the philosophy that I was talking about, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. It is ideas which shape history, and it is the sanction of the victim that permits the victimizers to keep eating, thriving, moving along. And it's the same with these Islamist monsters in the Middle East. It is the sanction of the West that keeps them alive and going. I mean, think of how much U.S. aid goes to the Kingdom of Jordan or to Egypt that keeps those economies going. No, it's our sanctioning, our material subsidization in most cases that keeps evil alive and well and thriving, and is the background radiation that you all just take as a given, sort of an axiom. Well, it's not just a given. It's not just a given, ladies and gentlemen. It's ideas, and it's the sanction of the good of the evil that keeps it going.
Yeah, and again, Israel, the day after it declared independence, the war was declared on it officially. Unofficially, that war had been fought from before that, and Israel was weaker, certainly had fewer people. It survived that war. It survived until today. It is Israel that will defeat Israel if Israel is fully defeated.
Yes.
And the U.S. also, population-wise, China should be way ahead. So yeah, it's just like it's Israel that will defeat Israel. It will be the U.S. That will defeat the U.S. Not if we can help it. We will continue doing our thing here against all odds and trying to save ourselves from ourselves.
That's very well put. Civilization is committing suicide, ladies and gentlemen, before our eyes. And the only fix, the only antidote to that poison is philosophy. We have to stop committing suicide and we have to stop feeding our murderers. But that's what we're doing, morally and materially.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody, for watching. The Daily Objective and the reality show return tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Be safe.